And then he comes in here, and I think he has surprised everyone so much with his maturation as a quarterback that I think it's taking people a little bit of time to trust that, to trust what they're seeing, to trust the improvements that Jalen Hurts has made.
You got your Mag guys, McMullen and McDonald here with you on Birds 365. And we got a good guest. He's good because he knows what the hell he's talking about, but I didn't even realize this. The reason we've got John on today is because we were like, due to have John on, and John's good. We like to try and punch him up once a month. I forgot that they're playing DC this week. This would be the Commanders and the Eagles. And, of course, he's a Philadelphia guy. He's been with Bleeding Green Nation for years, but doing some DC work as well so he can give us both sides of the aisle. Pardon the pun on election day.
Yeah, election day. Well
yes,
done,
sir.
Jody.
Very good. For both the Commanders and the Eagles from Bleeding Green Nation, John Stolnis jumping aboard with us. Yeah, you're a DC guy now these days. Still have your finger on the pulse here in Philadelphia, but Is it just nuts down there? I never even consider. I got to vote for head across the street and go to my middle school after we're done here today and cast my ballot. But is it even more nuts down there in DC on a day like this?
You know what? It's actually less nuts in DC because everybody's out of town. Everybody is in their districts. Everybody is in their home states, and they're doing their campaigning and their last-minute blitzes. And usually the last couple of days before an election, you've got the president and his people are out across the country trying to get people to the polls and all that stuff. So it's actually quieter in DC in the couple of days before an election day. Now, a month later, it gets nutty when everybody starts showing up for work, but it's okay right now.
Yeah, sort of like the shore. You get that little respite for the locals, and
that's right.
And then all the out of towners come back, and you get depressed, I imagine.
That's right. That's right.
John, let's start it with, before we get into the Eagles Commanders, because Jody and I talked about Frank Reich yesterday, and I said, he's not going to get fired. And of course, a couple hours after the show ends, he gets fired.
Yeah.
Another solid prediction by yours truly. But nonetheless, Eagles fans, and Frank is very popular, obviously here for good reason. And I started getting the questions right away, John. Are they going to bring Frank Reich back? And I'm sitting there, this is an 8-0 team. Everything's going well. Don't worry about Frank Reich, who, by the way, is under contract through 2026. He's getting paychecks for a while.
Very nice.
Jim Irsay. Why is everybody so in tune with adding when you're sitting there? You're doing well. It's about, in my opinion, John, it should be about sustaining, not anything else.
Right. No, and I think there's still that residue from the Super Bowl and those questions when Doug Peterson struggled in, I guess, what was it, 2020? Did they keep the wrong guy? There was all that conversation going on, and that's still, I think, lingering for some Eagles fans. But you've got Shane Steichen, who is doing a phenomenal job as the offensive coordinator. Nick Sirianni, all these guys, they're in their second year together, and you're just seeing how it's all kind of coming together here in this 8-0 start. There's no need to be wistful or to be looking to add somebody from the Doug Peterson regime at this point. Now, Shane Steichen, the way he's going, might get a head coaching job next year. And so at that point, if Nick Sirianni feels comfortable with the role reversal and Frank Reich feels comfortable with the role reversal of Sirianni's the head coach, Frank Reich the offensive coordinator, maybe that could be something you can consider. But I have a hard time believing either guy would be happy with that particular scenario.
Yeah, it would be difficult. A little bit awkward.
Awkward's the perfect word. And by the way, I guarantee you we see Frank Reich come camp next year. He's going to be one of those visiting coaches who comes in and spends
like Vic Fangio this year, which, by the way, and that's another thing. I want to clear that up real quick. Vic Fangio is not a consultant for this team. So I got all kinds of fans saying, like, bring in Frank Reich like they have Vic Fangio. Vic is not a consultant with this team. He showed up in the summer and he did a tour of the league because half of the league runs his defense. But he is not a consultant with this team. Now, they can text him and say, hey, like anybody. Friends, I text Jody, Jody texts John, vice versa.
Yeah.
hey, what do you think of this? What do you think? They can do that, but he's not getting paid by the Eagles. He's not a consultant. And Frank Reich's not going to be paid by the Eagles.
No.
But guess what?
But he'll be a camp, I guarantee you.
Oh, yeah.
If he's not employed, he's going to be still cashing those Thursday checks. But he'll be hanging out with Nick at the Novacare
if he's not employed. And by the way, when the Eagles play the Colts in a couple weeks, he's probably going to answer those texts pretty quickly now from Nick Sirianni. So from that aspect, maybe it helps a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, these guys obviously have a relationship. I mean, they worked really well together in Indianapolis. And now that Frank doesn't have any close ties to the Colts anymore, I'm sure he'd be willing to help out his former protege. So, I think that what we see with NFL teams is even if there's no specific relationship, these guys are all looking to their friends and other executives for ideas. People who've done things well in this league, you're always looking to cherry pick and see if you can get some nuggets here and there to sprinkle in and add to whatever it is you do.
All right, the Colts had won a couple of the Commanders had won a couple games in a row for letting the Sunday game slip through their fingers. Taylor Heineke with a really bad pick. He didn't play awful, but he didn't play great, and he did throw a real bad pick in that one. Is DC happy with what they're getting from their new old quarterback?
Well, I don't know that I think they're happier than they were with Carson. I think the frustration with Carson Wentz grew to such an immense level that a change needed to be made, even if Carson hadn't gotten hurt. The offense looked so dismal and flat. And it seemed like we saw with Carson in 2020, it seemed like you had to move mountains to move the ball down the field when Wentz was at quarterback. And you just see the skills that Wentz once had are gone. There's just none of that electricity there anymore. The big arm is still there, but he can't get away from pressure. And so with Heineke, I think Commanders fans were excited about having what they perceive to be playmaking quarterback, a guy who can be a little bit more mobile, who can make plays on the run. And in that vein, he has done that. I mean, he has brightened up the offense a little bit. They have looked a little more dangerous, but Taylor Heineke is Taylor Heineke. And you saw both sides of that in the game on Sunday. And I watched a lot of that game against the Vikings. It was the tale of two Taylors. In the first half, they were not very productive. He didn't play all that well in the first half. And in the second half, in that third quarter specifically, he kind of got lucky on the deep ball.
John. Yeah. That was pure luck.
Yeah. And so he threw it into triple coverage, and the referee happened to take one of the guys out. And I don't know what the other Vikings defenders were doing on that play. So you get 7 there, and then he takes him on a nice drive for that second touchdown. But then he throws the pick, and the Commanders just aren't able to overcome mistakes at this point. They haven't built up enough of a winning culture, and they don't have a quarterback who can dig them out from under mistakes. And so Taylor Heineke is a backup quarterback in this league. That's what they have. I think they know that they have that. He can win you a few games here and there, and he probably will start the rest of the season, but you know what you're going to get with Taylor Heineke. And that's a 500 slightly less than 500 quarterback.
Let me jump in there because Ed Kratz is coming up later, our resident Sam Howell fan. You say Heineke's probably going to play the rest of the year. At some point, they'll probably become eliminated. They may not from a playoff spot, certainly from the division. Is Howell not going to get a chance at all this year? If Heineke plays Heineke-like football, which is kind of like he did this past Sunday, makes a couple of plays, gets exciting, makes a mistake, overall not going to be a franchise guy for years to come. What is the Sam Howell feel in Washington these days?
There's not a lot of conversation about him because they had won a few games in a row and they'd gotten themselves back into the NFC playoff picture because the conference is so weak and the powerhouses that we thought were going to be great have really faltered here this season. So the door is still open for the Commanders to sneak in and get that last wild card spot. If Taylor Heineke can play, I mean, a 500 record, a slightly over 500 record, it might be enough to get the Commanders in the playoffs. And we saw the defense from the Commanders was legit on Sunday. They were all over Kirk Cousins in that game. So you can win games against inferior opponents with that defense and Taylor Heineke doing just enough. I don't think Howell gets any playing time until this team gets eliminated from postseason contention and they start to look towards next year. But for right now, they're 4-5 at this point? They're still well in the conversation, and there's no conversation about Howell coming in and taking over.
Yeah, John, I like you, I saw that game because the Eagles were off, and that was the local game here. Um, and I was disappointed in Taylor Heineke. I thought he'd give him a little bit more juice. We mentioned the play. He threw for 149 yards. You take away that 50-yard touchdown, he's under 100 yards against a team that can't defend the pass very well. Um, and he made the big turnover late. The Commanders should have won that game when they got that break with the back judge just wiping out a guy who's going to intercept this long touchdown.
Right.
But that defensive front, and I've been telling Jody, and I go back to the first game, Nick Sirianni, and he wasn't blowing smoke up our you-know-what. He kept talking about that defensive front and Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, Montez Sweat, who I think Montez Sweat may be one of the 2 or 3 most underrated players in football. He is so good, and nobody seems to know it, except the people in the league. Now you have Chase Young coming back. And Jody points out he's been a disappointment from what he was supposed to be. He was supposed to be, Bosa-like, for a lack of a better term, coming out of Ohio State. And he hasn't been that, but he's still a really good player. And all of a sudden, they started this practice window last week. It's pretty clear to me they were targeting this game to get him back. So you're going to have Chase Young. You're going to have Montez Sweat. You're going to have Jonathan Allen. You're going to have Deron Payne. And for people that don't know, because for years the Vikings have had a bad offensive line, they no longer have a bad offensive line. They've one of the better offensive lines in the league because they've spent so much draft capital over the past couple seasons. And that Washington front without Chase Young just ate their lunch, ate them alive. That's a concern for me, that defensive front.
It's a concern to me, too. I think in the Eagles' offensive line, it's not only just a very good one, it's probably the best in the NFL. So you have that going for you. In Kirk Cousins, you don't have a mobile quarterback who you have to worry about breaking containment and making plays outside. And so, or if there's an opening in the middle, taking off downfield and getting 7, 8, 10, 12 yards or whatever it happens to be. So if you're a Washington rusher and you're going up against Kirk Cousins, you can just pin your ears back and go out and get him. You can't really do that as much against Jalen Hurts. And I think also the RPO game, we saw what they did with Micah Parsons against Dallas. They can kind of freeze some of those guys in the RPO game and the run game to kind of keep them off balance and negate a little bit of that pressure that you can get from the defensive front. So I think the Eagles have a few additional tools in their tool belt to deal with a defensive front like what you'd see from Washington. I think we've seen them utilize that against a good defense like Dallas, and I imagine that's probably one of the things they'll try to do in the game against Washington on Monday night is use those RPOs, use the threat of Jalen Hurts being able to run the football. And as good as Minnesota's offense can be, the Eagles have more weapons that they can utilize in the passing game to kind of keep Minnesota off balance. So I think that, yes, it's a concern what Washington did last week to a good offensive line in Minnesota, but I think the Eagles are equipped to handle it. Whether they will, we'll see.
All right. John's concerned about the Washington defensive front. I'm actually more concerned about the Eagles defensive front. Sans Jordan Davis, not as good against the run. The back seven, not as good as tackling as they need to be. Linebackers, safeties, corners. The Eagles are the worst tackling team in the National Football League, 32nd out of 32, at least according to Pro Football Focus. Is that a bad matchup against this Heineke-led Commanders team coming in this week? If the Eagles continue to have issues with tackling and stopping another team from running, 4 straight games that the opposition has gone for a 120 plus, will the Commanders have the capability of making them pay coming up on Monday night for their lack of run defense?
I don't think to the degree that the Texans did, because I don't think Washington knows what to do with their running backs. I don't think they know what to do with Antonio Gibson or Brian Johnson. They haven't really been able to establish any kind of a consistent run game this year. It's certainly a possibility, but I think what you see in the Eagles is their defense has traded tackling for making the splash plays, getting the interceptions, getting pressure with their front four, and getting to the quarterback. And I think given the fact that this offense can put together long scoring drives, that they do have explosiveness as well, the defense is more willing to allow a team to run the ball 27 times, 30 times in a game. And, maybe get 150 yards on the ground if they're not getting anything through the passing game. Because more often than not, the Eagles are playing with a lead here so far this season. So you would like to see the tackling be better. I think in a lot of cases, you're seeing it being traded for trying to knock the ball out, for trying to make plays on the ball as opposed to wrapping up. Is certainly something they can clean up. The other thing I'll say is, too, playing on Thursday night, it's hard to take a whole lot of firm judgments away from a team when you're playing 4 days after the day before. You're still physically not feeling great. You don't get a chance to game plan quite as well as you would on a longer week.
Timeout, Washington/Philadelphia. Isn't that the same for both teams? Yeah, the Eagles coming in on a short week. It's real hard. The Texans were coming in on a short week, too. Dameon Pierce didn't seem to be bothered by not much rest as he was running over the Eagles' attempted tacklers.
Yeah, and that's fair. I think, too, if you're on the offensive, it might be a little bit easier when you're on a short week to when you're dictating things offensively to kind of have a little bit more of a leg up on the defense. Your point's well taken. I mean, both teams had to deal with that. But I think when you're looking at a team that's tired, tackling is a thing that requires energy. It requires you to be fresh. And I think that's one of the things we saw in week 1 against the Lions, having not gotten a whole lot of tackling in training camp and all that. They just weren't sharp tackling the ball carriers. And it's not the sole reason why we saw that on Thursday night, but I think it's a factor.
John, I want to talk big picture Eagles with you, where we are in this league after a week in which Buffalo lost again to Jody's New York Jets. Now, it's a better Jets team than normal. It's a good team, the Jets. Yeah. They're not what they typically are. But nonetheless, if you're supposed to be the best team in football, you're supposed to win that game. And they didn't.
Yeah, right.
And Kansas City really struggled at home, managed to get it done. Patrick Mahomes had to throw it 68 times to beat a team with a backup quarterback who they don't even feel comfortable allowing to throw the football. So I think it's safe to say the Chiefs weren't very impressive. And here we are, finally, after 8 consecutive wins. The Eagles are top of most of the betting markets. Jalen Hurts is tops in the MVP race, or at least tied in the betting markets. Yet locally with Eagles fans, and I'll start it there with you, I get a lot of Eagles fans who don't believe in this team. Who have they played? Now, I expect it from outside fans, the Cowboy fans. And, you kind of just say, all right, Cowboys fans are Cowboys fans. They're going to, try to morph things for their team and shape their narrative around what they want. Yeah. But Eagles fans, and you're a Phillies guy, John. You just came off the World Series. Disappointing, but great run for the Phillies. Yeah. But they were the underdogs.
Yeah.
The Eagles aren't the underdogs, but I think Philadelphia has this whole underdog mentality to the point Jason Kelce started a clothing line, underdogs. They're not the underdogs. They're the big dog. Embrace it. They're the best team in football. That's what I've been saying this week. Why do so many fans not realize that?
That's a good question. And I think as I think about this Eagles team, I don't think this is the most talented Eagles team we've ever seen. I think that, and I think but they're 8-0. And I think it's because they are playing in a conference that is as weak, I think, as we've seen the NFC in a number of different years. And I think for most Eagles fans, they look at this team as a good team, but I think they say to themselves, in any other year, they probably wouldn't be where they are. If this team was playing as well as they were last year, maybe they wouldn't be where they are. I don't necessarily agree with that. I also think it comes down to the quarterback. Think about the other two times that Eagles teams were considered tops in the NFL. You had the 2004 team with Donovan McNabb and Terrell Owens. Donovan McNabb drafted number 2 overall in the draft. He was expected to be a superstar, and he became a superstar. Carson Wentz in 2017, his second year in the league, drafted number 2 overall. He was expected to be a superstar. He was a superstar. Jalen Hurts drafted in the 2nd round. Nobody liked the pick. I didn't like the pick at the time, hated the pick. He comes in, is kind of middling. Last year, he's a runner, but doesn't do much as a passer. Nobody coming into this season was sure of Jalen Hurts, what he could be, what he would do. I think most people believed he was not this team's future at quarterback. The Eagles this offseason made overtures towards every available quarterback, it seemed, about potentially coming to Philadelphia, because I don't think they believed that Jalen Hurts was the future of the franchise. And then he comes in here, and I think he has surprised everyone so much with his maturation as a quarterback that I think it's taking people a little bit of time to trust that, to trust what they're seeing, to trust the improvements that Jalen Hurts has made. And I think the fact that it's taking a little bit of a long time for everybody to get on board with Jalen Hurts as the franchise guy, having been a second-round pick, somebody we weren't really sure about, being that dude, I think that's why you're seeing a little bit of a delayed reaction to Eagles fans really grabbing a hold and saying, yes, this is the best team in the NFL. If you put them on a neutral field with the Chiefs, if you put them on a neutral field with the Bills, they can beat those teams. They can dominate whoever it is they're playing on the rest of their schedule. So to me, that's kind of where it comes down to. Any lingering doubt I have about this 2022 Eagles team, it kind of comes down to the quarterback and me actually saying to myself, am I believing what I'm seeing so far? Because it's kind of hard to believe what we've seen from Hurts here this year.
All right, I'm going to go against my own credo here, so shame on me, but the conversation is kind of taking us there. I do Sunday show on CBS Sports Radio with Zach Gelb. He does Eye on Football for 8 hours. 8-hour show. Wow. They don't pay him enough. I just come in, give him a helping hand for the last 2 hours. And he asked me the other day when the Eagles won, when they got the 7-0 before the Texans game, this was the previous Sunday, Eagles and undefeated. They're the only undefeated team left, and with every passing week, they become more of an undefeated team because they've logged that many W's, and they've only got so many games left to play. When does this actually become a pressure point? That I say it every day. Welcome to a Wednesday undefeated edition of Eagle Birds 365. So I'm guilty as much as anybody else, but at some point it's going to become a real conversation, just kind of in passing. The Eagles, the only undefeated team. When it becomes more real, does it start to build pressure on the Eagles? Because not only are they going, hopefully they open up a little distance. Minnesota takes a loss. Dallas take a loss. They'll be the not only the number one team via the standing, but by playoff positioning and everything else. But undefeated does bring a little extra pressure with it, does it not?
Yeah, I think it does, and it's not a bad thing. I mean, especially if they kind of wrap things up early, it would be nice to have something to play for down the stretch. I think if they can take care of Tennessee, which I think is going to be a really hard game for the Eagles.
So do I. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. Yeah. Yep. Given their run defense issues and Derrick Henry, that could be a problem. And Tennessee plays good defense. That's a tough, hard-nosed team. You got to play Dallas in Dallas, and you got to play the Giants in the one game that's probably going to matter this year. I think that's in New York, right? They play in New York in Week 14, I think it was.
Yeah.
So you get past those three hurdles. Now all of a sudden, undefeated is a real possibility. I think that's when it starts to become real. I think you get 3/4 of the way through the season. You've got those 4 games left, or in this stupid 17-game schedule we have, you have 5 games left or whatever it is. And you pretty much know you're going to be the number 1 seed at that point, or you've got the division locked up more than likely. Now, all of a sudden, it becomes about being undefeated. And really, the coaching staff has a difficult decision. If they've locked things up by week 15, do they go for an undefeated season? How much do you play the starters? How much do you want to set to make history in that way? I don't know that the coaching staff will allow the team to pursue a perfect season for this to even be a question towards the end of the season.
Let me interrupt, because the way you stated, it's not going to be the coaching staff. It's going to be the organization.
Yeah.
Because we don't believe the coaching staff dictates everything when it comes to the way the players are handled and used and given off time and rest and protection and everything else. That's an organizational thing. So it's not going to be Shane Steichen or Gannon or Nick Sirianni dictating things. It's going to be a whole organizational decision.
Yeah. No, that's true too. And I think if Howie Roseman is pushing for it, then that'll become a pressure point. I think what the Eagles really have going in their favor is Jalen Hurts does not seem to be fazed by any of that stuff. And this team seems to go wherever he takes them. So we'll see. I mean, I don't think it's going to get to that point. I think they probably drop a game between now and week 15. But
wouldn't be the worst thing. Jody brought that up yesterday, John. He, and I agree with him. People say, get the loss out of the way. It's a good thing. I don't necessarily agree with that aspect of it, but it does eliminate that pressure point. And you're not talking about, should the Eagles rest players down the stretch versus play to win the game? Because I guarantee you, Nick Sirianni's the most competitive guy in the world. He's going to want to go 17-0.
Oh yeah.
And you don't have that sort of butting of heads. And maybe it is that Tennessee game, which doesn't, styles make fights, as they say. And you point out that's a hard-nosed team. And you might lose, think about Kansas City, Tennessee, 2017 in overtime, whatever it was. You might lose a 2017 game, really close, just grind it out. Wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Now, people would be jumping off bridges and saying, oh, my God, what's wrong? You lost a football game. But it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. I kind of agree with that from the aspect of it's logical. You expect, and the Eagles have had games where they haven't performed at a high level. Arizona, Detroit, at least for letting him back in the game. So they've had these little stretches. But it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to lose a football game. I think we could all agree with that, correct?
Yeah. Do you? Well, let me ask you. Can I ask you guys a question? Do you guys think that Howie Roseman and Eagles management would push for the perfect season, or do you think they would push for the Eagles to make sure that they're ready for our Super Bowl run?
Yeah, I think they want to win the Super Bowl. Yeah. I don't think they give a rat's ass about going 17-0. So, judging by the way this team handles its business, if they wrapped everything up, we're going to see Gardner Minshew. I mean, and they'll try to win the game with, and certain, because you're limited with the game day roster, certain starters have to play. They're going to try to win that game, but the goal is to win the Super Bowl, not go 17.
Johnny, how'd their attempt trying to beat the Cowboys week 17 last year go?
Yeah. Well,
they can try all they want.
They're a better team.
You put the JV out there, you're going to get JV results.
They're a better team. But you brought this up before, so I'll run this by you, John. Now, I've only been covering this team on a daily basis since 2015, but I saw the Super Bowl team up close every day. This team's more talented than that team. Now, I can't go back to 2004, but the quarterback point you brought up is true. I mean, you have Donovan McNabb, a high-level talent, Carson Wentz, a high-level talent, and Jalen Hurts wasn't supposed to be that. But I got to tell you, if this is a ceiling, it's pretty good.
Yeah,
it's acceptable. This team is the most talented Eagles team that I've covered from 2 through 52. I was just looking at Buffalo today because everybody says how talented they are, how gifted they are. It's about the quarterback. The same thing, reverse. It's about Josh Allen. The Eagles are better than the Bills, 2 through 52. The Eagles are better than the Chiefs, 2 through 52. And that goes back to my other point of, don't be scared of it. This team's got difference makers all over the place. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, as we started the season, we looked at the team Howie Roseman put together when they got Gardner Johnson. We thought, okay, that was the last hole on the team, and they filled it. The biggest question mark was the quarterback. Everything else would look like it was they had painted by numbers and gotten the whole picture painted. So you're right. I mean, top to bottom, it's amazing how adding A.J. Brown completely reconfigured the offense. It just and moving Jalen Reagor out, bringing in a guy like Zach Pascal just gives you four receivers now that you can legitimately count on, and it's amazing how it's opened everything up. It's you're right. I mean, this is a more talented team than 2017. I think it's more talented than 2004. 2004, you had another great offensive line. You had Jim Johnson, who was sending people at the quarterback. But I think this team is probably the most talented, and it was all depending on the quarterback to make it go, and it's been unbelievable.
And by the way, quarterbacks can get paid, and this is kind of a conversation that sits on the fringes every single week Well, we know we don't have to talk about it because they can't even negotiate with him till after the season is over and done with.
Right.
You know what's going to be the big sticking point? I just love your take on this, John. Lamar Jackson's still not signed with the Ravens. Mm-hmm. And you listen to anybody around the league, the sticking point, the rubbing point is the guaranteed money. Mm-hmm. And everyone is still really annoyed at the Cleveland Browns for giving Deshaun Watson what they get because he reset the bar and everybody is going to try and negotiate to that bar. Lamar Jackson certainly. And guess what? Jalen Hurts is right in that conversation right now. How many hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's a plural too, is the minimum number is going to be guaranteed by the Eagles? How big a stumbling block is this going to be? I know we don't even have to worry about it for months, but at some point we will. Is that going to be the issue between the Eagles and Jalen Hurts getting a contract extension done?
It's probably one of the reasons it'll take a while. I'm sure Hurts's camp will be pushing for that. Howie Roseman is a magician at getting contracts done. So at the end of the day, I'm not worried that an extension will get signed. I think it makes sense for everybody. The Eagles, if Jalen Hurts continues this season the way he's been playing, the Eagles have to pay him, and I think Jalen Hurts is in the stronger negotiating position. So it might be a lot of conversation. I think at the end of the day, Jalen Hurts gets the contract he wants, and maybe there's a trade-off in terms of dollars for guaranteed money, but if I'm the Eagles, what I've seen from Jalen Hurts, if this is the real thing, and if he does this for the rest of the season, I don't see as they have any other choice but to go ahead and do it. And you cross your fingers and hope he stays healthy and stays as productive as he is.
Yeah, you're right, John. And I think it's, the Deshaun Watson contract will be looked at as an outlier by the league. I think Kyler Murray's the better sort of comp point, and that's where the negotiations probably start at, and that's pretty big anyway.
Still good.
But I'll end it here with you at John Stolnis. Follow John on Twitter. Read him at bleedinggreen.com. Listen to Eye on the Enemy if you want some Phillies news. The Good Bites, his podcast there. Other contracts. I mean, this entire defense is basically on a 1-year deal almost. Mm-hmm. And you're going to have to make some tough decisions, whether it's Fletcher Cox or Javon Hargrave, whether it's Kaiser White or TJ Edwards. You got to get Marcus Epps signed. You got to get Chauncey Gardner-Johnson signed. Obviously, you're not going to be able to do everything.
Right.
So how important is this window for the Eagles? I mean, the window's open. It's not open a crack. How important is it to seize this opportunity?
Yeah, it's really important. You're not going to be able to assemble this collection of talent around Jalen Hurts again because his cap number is going to be such that you're not going to be able to do like what you're talking about, sign all of those guys. Bradbury, is another guy that you would ideally love to bring back, assuming he can play at a high level moving forward too. I think you've got to trust that some of the draft picks you made last year are going to take on more prominent roles. Nakobe Dean is probably going to be a starter next year, and you've got to hope that he's as good as advertised. Jordan Davis is going to have to play a lot more and do a little bit more than they've asked him to do so far. They're going to have another high first-round pick this year. Do you trade that away for a lower first-round pick and another second-round pick to kind of give yourselves a few more bullets because you're going to need some cheaper talent on hand next year if you're paying Jalen Hurts? You have to start building through draft. You can't look in free agency. You can't look in trades as much. And so you have to all of a sudden shift gears a little bit and make sure that, your picks that you used this year, the previous season, and then what they make in 2023 are going to be able to produce for you. And but that's why it's important that while you have all those guys you just mentioned, to take advantage of this, because this probably will be the most talented team that Jalen Hurts ever plays with, just simply because they're not paying Jalen Hurts all that much money right now.
All right, John, last one for you, and I'm going to follow up on what John was just asking you about, but ask you to go a step further. Howie's been great at getting these contracts done in this. John's talking about the window to win a Super Bowl. I'm talking about the window in this season after the trade deadline, before the playoffs start. getting a contract extension done. Last year, he got Mailata done. He got Goddard done. He got Maddox done, all at pro Eagle type numbers.
Yeah.
I'm going to set the bar for you. It's going to be fair market value, not Eagle discount because they love Philadelphia or Howie's a great negotiator, not an overpayment, picking out the one guy and say, all right, if we got to go above and beyond, this is the guy we got to secure. This is what we got to get done. Fair market value for what you, me, and John McMullen would consider fair market value. And I think we know enough about the National Football League to be able to come up with that number. Who's the number one guy? Who's the guy, if you knew today you could get him done for fair market value going forward, year or two of a contract, who would you prioritize of all the Eagles free agents at the end of the year?
That's a good question. I mean, you usually look to strengthen the lines first.
That's Eagle centric. That's Eagles 101. When in doubt, take care of the trenches.
Yep. And so in that case, you're probably thinking Javon Hargrave as the guy you want to sign first. He scares me because he's so streaky. You know, he has games like he's had the last couple of games, and then you don't hear from him for a little while, and you just got Jordan Davis for a defensive tackle spot. Fletcher Cox probably isn't here next year, so you can have both those guys. The other guy I'm thinking of is James Bradbury. Having 3 great cornerbacks to shut down the passing game, you see how important that is. And to have 3 guys who can actually get turnovers is really important. I probably go with Hargrave because of how important it is to get pressure on the quarterback. Getting pressure means you can maybe have a different guy out there as your number 2 cornerback and still get some of the turnovers that you would see. But it's neck and neck between those 2 guys. I would probably go Hargrave over Bradbury.
All right, John Stolnis, feel free to go vote. Now, are you voting down there?
I already voted. I already voted.
You already did. You already got out and got it done.
Yeah, my polling place is literally 2 blocks away, so I just walk over and I'm in there 5 minutes and out. It's great.
Damn, you are a good.
You got the I voted sticker. You got it ready to go.
It's my sweatshirt. I don't have it on right now, but I got it. Yeah.
We trust you. That's why we have you on, because we believe you. John, great stuff. Thanks much for jumping in today. We'll get you on about a month from now. Thanks, buddy.
Sounds good, guys.
Thanks, John.